Welcome to Trash Compactor. I'm Josh. On this, the final episode of Trash Compactor for 2022, we're going to be talking about Andor Season 1, and joining me today is Mickey
Hey,
and Bracey.
yellow.
So, in our first Andor reaction episode, we talked about how it seemed like this was Star Wars or Star Wars grew up alongside us. Bracey, do you think the rest of the season is consistent with that reading? And also, what are your overall thoughts of the show from having seen season 1?
Yeah, I absolutely think that it continued to grow up. In fact, in ways that it was so much more mature than I even thought in the reading of the first four episodes. Um, it grew up. Star Wars grew up, and it felt great. It felt like meeting an old friend again, and I really enjoyed the ride.
Mickey, I guess I'll phrase it slightly differently. Do you still agree that that's the best way to describe what Andor is Star Wars if Star Wars grew up?
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I'll be a little I'll throw it a little bit of loop where it's like if Star Wars grew up with it, or almost if in an alternate universe, this is what got made in like 2000, the episode 1, the prequels never came out, and instead this was made instead, you know, like, because I definitely also think in terms of Tony Gilroy, this is his most like, in terms of where he went from Michael Clayton on out, this is his most Michael Clayton-ish work. Um, Too. Like he's kind of like to me, I almost felt like he's kind of got a little less like as um so word I'm looking for serious or something. He's got a little bit more genre with this post my play, and this is kind of returning to those roots in the Star Wars universe in that way. And to that thing is like, yeah, this show is amazing. It's an amazing character study of movements and you know stuff, and ultimately to the thing that I just really appreciate it for, I think more than anything, it's just the writing in terms of like the monologue. You just monologuing is just amazing. Just like it reaches, it's almost kind of to a point where it's unrealistic. Well, I mean, it's Star Wars, so who cares, right? But like, it's like, oh, not Shakespearean, and that's it's copying it, but the idea that it has this kind of its own singular language and beats and stuff. That it kind of like has its own feel in the language department like that. And it's all the better for it.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. That reminds me of something that we were talking about in the first Andor reaction pod we did, where we were talking about the use of language in the show and how it was using it in a very sophisticated way. And yeah, this is certainly heightened, but it's not heightened in the way we are used to Star Wars being heightened. And I think it really allows for something really unique where you can tell this realistic, grounded story about revolution and movements and fighting fascism. And, it really gets into the on the ground point of view of it versus, I think, most Star Wars, particularly the original trilogy and the prequels, are really focused on the broad strokes of the people at the top of the movement. I mean, this is the people on the ground. And to quote Tony Gilroy from an interview he gave, the original gangsters of the rebellion, right? And like we forget the rebels in the original trilogy are the Rebel Alliance, the alliance to restore the Republic. And it's an alliance between all of these factions who, we are seeing have different ideologies and different beliefs. They're all united in common cause in opposition to the Empire and the Emperor. And, we're seeing the nitty gritty of how that alliance is formed. And I think, some of my favorite scenes in the season were the scenes with Luthen and Saw, where you're really seeing those ideological conflicts played out, which again, I think is very true to the material reality of what goes on in real revolutionary movements and real, I don't want to say leftist movements, but that's what I'm thinking of. I think,
Yeah.
revolutionary movement is more
I,
appropriate.
I think revolution, because I mean, it's almost like whenever you listen to like some history podcasts or whatever, they talk about the Roman factions, right? Or whatever, the the proles and stuff. It's like you can't actually put that right in the perspective of leftism versus rightism, and I feel like
Yeah.
you can probably make the same argument about Star Wars, like there wasn't the modernist philosophy movement that then you can also say that like these like what we think of traditionally the left or right is like born in within our modern world. So, I think there's argument. I mean, there's definitely an argument to make, and I think it's true that it's a leftist show, but at a certain point, maybe more a better way to think about it is a show about, like, I wouldn't say it's a revolutionary. I mean, that's a whole other question. It's like what makes the work itself of revolutionary or leftist work, or work about leftism or revolution, which, I think, like Andor's on, like, Andor's certainly not Goddard with his editing style that you can also say is using the medium to also be revolutionary at the same time, but it's definitely about revolution, right? At the very least,
No,
if not
for
less than,
sure.
it's definitely a show about revolution. And it's interesting what you're saying, the rebel light. That's one of those things you got to think back when you think of Star Wars. Like, how much was that plan? What did you actually get out of Star Wars when you go back and watch, and like the rebel, the alliance, the story, whatever. And it's like, was that just something cool sounding, right? That Lucas said, no, that sounds like a cool thing, and now you get to play in the sandbox, but he made this cool thing, and now Tony Gilroy's like, oh, the alliance to restore that's, let's play with that. Or I guess probably Rebels did it beforehand, but that it's like just a cool like sounding thing Lucas made that now gets to become more fleshed out and everything. But
Yeah,
but also like Tony Gilroy in that same thing said he's a history, and that's what like the Russian Revolution was. There was many factions that joined the white, like the whites and everything. So that's very historically kind of accurate in that regard.
yeah, and for us who didn't grow up with the Rebels TV shows and stuff like that, or the what's the other series, the Clone Wars, like
Yeah.
uh there's no reason for us to care about the Star Wars universe outside of the context of the movies and what we've seen in the later shows. But I feel like this show finally, because it dives into the factions and like what's going on and like what built up the rebellion, how it was formed, it actually gives us a way to care about the world of Star Wars outside of the family of the Skywalkers, which is really like I really appreciate that. Like there's depth there that I get to like dive into.
No, that's a really important point, actually. Like, one of the things that people have been saying for the last few years is that the way for Star Wars to move forward is it's got to get away from Skywalkers. It's got to get away from Skywalkers. And even though the show Andor is still set in that original trilogy Imperial era, I think it's as far away from that as you can get. Like, that's why I saw this an article was suggested for me in my feed, and I saw the headline, "Is Luthen secretly a Jedi?" And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, like that is just like, I mean, I can tell you definitively, like, I would bet my life that he's not secretly a Jedi. Like, that's like, here's the thing about that. If Luthen was presented to us, like, if this was a Jedi that we were following that ended up like this, that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
But the character of Luthen that we are presented to all of a sudden discover later that he was once a Jedi, and that's like, what is motivating all this or whatever, would totally undercut the whole thing that is being done with this character. It's not about Jedi. It's the people on the ground, the citizens who have to decide how they're going to fight, right? And it's really interesting. Someone was like, Luthen's past is so mysterious. Like, I wonder if we're going to learn about him. And I'm kind of like, I think we know exactly what Luthen was. Like, he owns this antique shop, right? Like, I think he was an antique dealer. I mean,
Yeah.
call me crazy. Like, I don't think it's that complicated. Like, I just think
Yeah.
he's a guy. He's obviously well off, and he's from, like, the capital of the galaxy, and like these highfalutin senators and whatever are his patrons. And so he obviously like hears a lot of stuff. And I think he was just like, fuck, like, am I going to let this happen? And he sees an opportunity to do something. And as reflected in that famous speech that he makes in episode 10, or by now famous, like, he made an equation and he decided to sell his soul to commit himself to this dream of a sunrise that he'll never see.
Yeah. His monologue is like, there is no mystery to his character. His monologue is his character. You don't need to, that's his past, that's his everything, like, again, if you want to talk about revolutions, like, these class traders are major key to a lot of these revolutions. You can tell that he's probably like his past before he got political, he probably still was a stubborn, hard-headed, refused to back down guy. That's probably maybe what makes him a great antique stealer, right? Like going to
Right.
sellers and being like, I'm not,
Haggling, and yeah, right.
and that personality hits a new political reality, and he's like, I can't accept this. I can't accept the empire. And it's not, and it might not even be political, right? It might be personal. He's just like, I'm a personality type that cannot accept a fascist,
Well,
ruling.
Yeah.
Mickey, the personal is political.
Well,
Sorry, you set me up.
You couldn't knock that down.
But he's not a
the-
Jedi until they take away season 2 from Tony Gilroy and give it to J.J. Abrams, and then he'll be a Jedi.
Oh no!
Well,
God,
that's exact.
it's
That's exact.
the
Actually,
worst.
Bracey and I were saying something similar the other day. What did you say? You were talking about like the J.J. Abrams version of this would be, which I mean, by the way, I don't want to shit on J.J. Abrams. Like he's very good at what he does, but he does something very different
He does
from.
spectacle. JJ does spectacle and build up to the spectacle and a release on that spectacle, and like it's all about. I mean, at least in my opinion, everything that I see that he does, his mystery box, it's trying to hit a feeling, and I feel most of the time the feeling is like mystery or spectacle, a spectacle.
Now I'm thinking that Nope is like a movie against the J.J. Abrams style of making movies.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh no, I won't say anything.
I have. I don't. Let's not. Yeah. But
It's amazing.
Yeah. This is what I hear. Oh man, I derailed my train of thought. There was something I was going to
Sorry.
say. It's
JJ Spectacle, creating a feeling, mystery box.
Well,
because I would agree. My thing with JJ is I think he's less concerned, not completely disinterested, but I think he's less concerned about the substance of what the story is actually about. Not to say that he doesn't think that that's a necessary ingredient. Like I think that there are themes and there is an aboutness in his Star Wars movies, but I just think that they're very not superficial, but it's sort of not the point of the exercise. It's sort of the excuse for the spectacle. Whereas something like this, like Andor, and I personally would argue The Last Jedi, is that there is something that they are trying to say first and foremost that Star Wars becomes a vehicle for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wait. I got the train of thought again. What I was gonna say, I also saw the content of Luthen. I saw that being like, oh, is this like he's some Jedi? And I feel like there is a tie to the people who were created because of the JJ era of Star Wars, that now everybody has just been trained to look for Easter eggs and like, did you catch that? And they don't really have they don't have the mental facility to like deep dive into the content, and they're just trying to like the thing that they learn, they're trying to apply it to this new content. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah. Well, they've been trained to watch Star Wars in a certain way, right? And this show I don't think operates like any other Star Wars does. So that actually brings me to a question that I thought about opening with. It's only slightly facetious, but is this the best Star Wars has ever been? Bracey, your thoughts?
For me, the answer is yeah. Like the answer is this is for what I want. I want to see my media grow and change and start to grapple with new content and ideas and current themes and re-explore what people are talking about in the current day, but maybe in a way that like disassociates us from the things that we hold dear. And so we're able to actually
because it's at a slight remove, because it is, at the end of the day, it is Star Wars, it is fantasy. So you can there's like
you're willing to engage with it. You're more willing to engage with different perspectives because it's coming through a medium that isn't it's fantasy, or it's a little escapism. So some of the messages.
Right. So you don't have your hackles up immediately the way that you would if you were talking about like real history or like the real world world politics. And that actually ties into something of another question I was going to ask later, which I think, Mickey, you actually kind of already addressed, was that I kept seeing like in the Twitter sphere while Andor was on, various versions of the question, is Andor a leftist show? And, setting that aside for a second, what I found really fascinating is I had many interactions with people on Twitter, and also I would just see it, of a lot of right-leaning conservatives also latched on to this show and thought it was a reflection of their values, which I thought was very interesting. The reason is, I think in fantasy, it's very easy to use the bad guys as sort of a vessel for whatever you hate. and the struggle against it as the struggle for whatever you value. So you sort of could read it on a superficial level. I think that that's like, I read one take from someone that the prison on Narcana 5 represented like Soviet style communism and totalitarianism. And this was a struggle against that. And I'm like, I mean, no, but fine. I don't think that that's what that was supposed to be. But like, if that's what you're seeing, then like, I don't know what to tell you.
If you think that gulag system was bad, wait until you hear about the actual prison industry that Nazi
Yes,
Germany was doing.
exactly. That was
Like,
actually a
how do you think
reply
they
to what
made those jets? Like they're
that was actually a reply. Someone replied with exactly that to that tweet. But anyway, Mickey, is this the best that Star Wars has ever been?
First of all, you're not going to get out to answer that question. I want to make sure, as hosting, I want to make sure you answer that question too. So let's not forget that.
Okay.
So when I'm done, yes, no. That would be my answer. My answer is it a better work of a? I mean, well, okay, let's put aside movie for Steve, just like a work of a filmic, whatever it is, you want to say it is better if you even want to say on a technical level, right? But Star Wars is right? Star Wars wouldn't exist if there wasn't Star Wars, A New Hope, whatever. New Hope is Star Wars. So the best Star Wars can be is probably really Star Wars, because that's what Star Wars is, you know. So I think if you want to take that outside, in like just basically be like Star Wars is this like very specific cultural piece. You're not going to usurp it on that level, but it's a better, I hate to say it, overall acted, shot, during, like all that stuff, and written. And then I think does much better. Like my main problem is I actually don't find Star Wars to be too political. I think they're using more like the aesthetics of like past political movements as pastiche to like simplify
Yes.
a story where Andor does not. Andor is doing a specific thing and specifically talking about politics. So yeah, no, it's the best it's the best produced thing from Star Wars. Whether it's pinnacle Star Wars, that's a whole other thing, because Star Wars is a very, I think, specific thing. To a point, again, that right, this is it really Star Wars John Williams scored? Isn't that part of Star Wars?
Yeah. Well, well,
And the music's great. I'm not saying this music sucks, but I'm just saying, like,
no, the music is awesome.
oh, it's so
Music
good,
is
especially that last
so
episode. Yeah,
I
oh
knew
my
I knew the moment that I heard like kind of that rock theme
yeah,
and
no, yeah,
Cassian
that
was
track,
walking. I was
yeah.
like Josh. Like I was like Josh. Like I don't know why. I was like I felt like that was a moment that you would have wanted to be in Star
I
Wars.
think I think that's at the end of episode 2,
Yeah, I think so.
I think, and the entire score is up on Spotify, and it's fantastic. But so Mickey, yeah, like I tend to agree with you. So my answer to the question is also like, sort of a cop out. It's like yes and no. Like, this is the most well done, most affecting thing to come out of Star Wars, I think, potentially ever. Um, but it's really working in a different register than Star Wars generally, or frankly, really ever has. And so, to that end, something about Star Wars that is missing from this, and that's okay, because it's not the foundational text for Star Wars. It's a derivative of Star Wars, but a very important element to the original Star Wars, which, Mickey, like you said, is very much a pastiche of a lot of things, was that like mythic quality that is lacking from this. And I think the limits of that approach with what the rest of Star Wars is probably The Empire Strikes Back, I think, is like the limit of what a certain idea of Star Wars in its original conception could be. And I think what Andor is not Star Wars, but it certainly is doing something that no Star Wars has ever done before. So the only thing stopping me from saying that this is the best that Star Wars has ever been is, number one, what you said, Mickey, like there is no Andor without Star Wars, right? Like as like a cultural artifact, it's like, you can't have this without that, right? But also the other thing is that like it's doing something very specific that has not till now existed in Star Wars's wheelhouse, right? And I think that's why it's so revelatory. I've heard people say, and I don't disagree, that this show is so good that even if it wasn't Star Wars, it would still be amazing. And that's true. But the flip side of that is it's amazing that it is in the Star Wars universe.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, the fact that this happened, that this got made is just absolutely like awesome, but also like a surprise.
No, yeah, I mean, not only is this a surprise, I mean, that it was even made, but also the other thing I mean is that there is something to be said for using existing storytelling universes, franchises, IP, whatever, because of the existing relationship that people have with it. When you tell us story about Revolution in the context of a beloved, film TV franchise, you are going to hit more people in a way than you would if it was like just its own original thing. So that's sort of what I mean. It's like there's a reason to utilize existing properties. And again, like just as an aside, I hate describing all these like wonderful works of art that I love as like properties or like franchises or intellectual property. But for lack of a better word, it's like for utilizing these existing beloved franchises that have these massive audiences, that allows you to do things that I think they take on a different resonance than if you had done the same show set in some generic sci-fi space fascist
Yeah.
setting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's my
there's
point.
more weight with the story, and yeah, I agree with that. I would say, going back to, is this the best Star Wars? Like, up until Rogue One, I felt that Empire was the best Star Wars, and that was second. And like, yeah, Star Wars came first, but I would still be like, Empire was the better Star Wars. Like, it was a better. Like, I understand it wouldn't exist without Star Wars, without the original, but still, given what it was, how it was able to affect, and what it was able to evoke in me, I was like, that's just a better. It's better. Like and then also after watching the prequels and talking to like my brother, or people who are my brother's age, who's about like 10 years younger than I am, they didn't even think about saying that the original Star Wars was good. They were like, those are puppets. Like, like they couldn't escape into the fantasy because of the way that it was made, which I think a lot of people would say about things like Doctor Who. Like, they're like, to me, Matt Smith, David Tennant, like best Doctor Who, like, and it's not the original, and it wouldn't exist without the original Doctor Who. So to me, I don't really align with that. But I would also say that I think this series is going to allow Star Wars to be Star Wars again, because what I feel like what happened since Star Wars is this: uh, people don't think about how rare Jedi's are in the galaxy, because all our whole vantage point has been through people who are like closely related to them. But I feel like this gives us this opportunity to like grow with characters, care about characters in this world, get away from that story arc long enough that when like a couple of series down the line, all of a sudden somebody flicks a lightsaber or somebody moves something, and people are gonna it'll blow their mind. They'll be like, "Holy shit!" Like somebody who can use the Force. I think it will give us that opportunity to feel that again. Whereas, like, I don't think anybody cares if somebody now shows up and they're like, "I have the Force." Like, oh yeah, another Force user, cool. Like it's not
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah. There's definitely something that's happened within to me, like, and I haven't really watched them, but just knowing about them, what's happened is like, why are there so many Jedi's after Order whatever? Like, I thought they're dead, but you keep on like. The nice thing too with what this show does by not having Jedi's is it also doesn't have Sith. It doesn't have Darth Vader. So like, what's the reality of a revolution when Vader comes, right? But the fact that no, he's off looking for Obi-Wan. So you get to
Right.
see the ISB do the ISB thing, which is what makes this show
Yeah,
good.
dude. Oh God. Like so much of what's in this show is really pushing all my buttons. Like each sort of slice of the story, the Mon Mothma political stuff, the Luthen stuff, the ISB stuff, like each one of those story threads is like a show and a world that I totally buy. I'm totally invested in. There's not a single one where when they cut away to it, I'm like, oh, okay, more of this. I'm less interested in this. Like everything, I was like, holy shit, like this is some good stuff. Like, I think what it comes down to, Mickey, is just really the writing and the attention paid to the characters, the truth of the characters, and the truth of the situation. And it's just masterfully constructed. It's just like a really exquisitely written show. It just is. It just is.
Just to your point, like there's like I'm pissed there's only going to be 2 seasons. Because it's
I
like
know.
how are you gonna like you only got one more season, but I want to see so much more of the Mon Mothma. Like, how are you gonna do the Mon Mothma storyline and her daughter's storyline should be much there should be much more
That
going on
was
in that.
that was incredible. Like
Yeah.
when you realize, oh my God, like what Mon Mothma, th- her sacrifice, like I think it was even in the same episode, like, what have you sacrificed? Like her
Yeah.
sacrifice, she's gonna have to sacrifice her daughter to the slime ball,
But then the
right?
thing is that they do in the last episode, that's the biggest twist. That's like it's a line or two that you don't get. Is her daughter's into it. And like that's two. I
Yeah.
want to see episodes and episodes on that. Like
No,
it's
I
kind of
know.
it
Get
might,
It's so
more
yeah, I would
well,
say it's
up.
probably the
Yeah.
most online Star Wars show ever because they're literally doing like the downtown New York City like hipsters become trad Catholics.
yeah,
Like
no, but that's what's so fascinating. Like to your point, one of you said this, but Tony Gilroy is not invested in Star Wars lore, and I think that's like a value neutral thing. It's like obviously not a problem that he's not invested in Star Wars lore, but what he does do when confronted with a character like Mon Mothma, he goes to the story group and Pablo Hidalgo and is like, so what's her backstory, right? So what has been said about this character? And like he gets whatever canon has been established, and then he sees a window to tell a story that he connects to that has some real world resonance, and he just gives the whole thing life, right? Like there's so much verisimilitude in the idea that her planet, Chandrilla or whatever, that like living away from it and sort of becoming more progressive than the conservative values of her culture, like that makes sense. But then the wrinkle that her daughter growing up completely separated from that culture would then be curious about it, and as an act of rebellion to their parents would sort of reach to the old ways because it's going against the grain of their parents. Like that is very
and doing
like
so in the shadow of fascism, right? Like kind of like
yes.
that like they're tied. There has to be a tie between why she's getting in that and the what's happening. And the other, I want to say one of my probably favorite character moments in the writing of the show that the character's not even in it, but when like the sister asks, "Oh, is it the husband?" And she's like, "No, actually, he's not like an asshole on this issue. Like he's a cad, he's a jerk, but he's actually like he's not some sort of like regressive like."
Yeah, like he doesn't give a shit about this.
There's a tiny moment like I love that so much for some reason, like that kind of like exploration of his character through like one line.
No, the relationship between Mon and Perrin, I think is the
Perrin,
husband's
yeah.
name, is so devastatingly real, and it's just wild. Like if you had told me that I would be this riveted by watching the tension that exists in like Mon Mothma's marriage from Return of the Jedi, like I'd have been like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Like that doesn't make. I don't see how that could be possible, but it's like so like the thing I think it was in the last episode where knowing that her driver was listening, she sort of threw him under the bus and like used him, made it seem like her money problems were because of his gambling. Was like the show's so good, like that's so
It's great. And that one line that Mickey was kind of referring to, I feel like it even makes that moment
Oh, yeah.
even worse because you're like, he's human. Well, I don't know what he is, but he's a person that has some faults, but like all in all, it's effed up to do what she's doing.
right.
But like the circumstance, and I think we touched on this in the first cover, like the first podcast about Andor, is just like there the circumstances change the value structure of what you're doing. Like it changes what constitutes bad, good, right, wrong, gray, like what like all those
Right.
things.
Well, to that point, the thing about Perrin that's so fascinating, again, Mickey, it takes on a different resonance in the shadow of fascism. He doesn't want to be bothered. He doesn't want to go against the grain. Like he just wants to live his rich lifestyle and like have fun with these rich people and throw parties and like whatever. And like fine. But in this context, when you're appeasing and going along with the horrors of the Empire, like it's not neutral. Like you may not yourself be like an evil dude, but your indifference or your unwillingness to sacrifice the life you want and your comfort in the face of what's going on, like that takes on a different moral valence in this context.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, but it's like, and like Bracey said, like you said, Bracey, that was a heartbreaking scene in its own way. Even though what you're saying true is, Josh, is this guy's like, dude, you can't be doing it. Like you
Yeah.
gotta step up. But and he's not. He's not good, but also he's human. And they really kind of played with that where the scene where you're like, oh, poor fucker, man. Like man,
But
that
to
sucks
me,
for
I feel
you.
like that's why this show is relevant, because
Right.
this is what we're living through. Like, this is
Exactly.
how we're framing right now our political system. We frame people as like, you're on my side or you're effed up. And there is like no in between. Like, increasingly, people are like going to these extremes. And I feel like those moments show, like, kind of reflect ourselves. Like, it makes it to some point that we're like, no, it's not just this is the right thing to do or they're on the wrong side. It's like what they're doing is not necessarily the right way to do this, or like but it doesn't make them pure evil and worthy of being thrown under the bus.
I agree that it's more complicated and I agree that it is a tragedy, but I wouldn't go as far to say that like the two extremes are morally equivalent. Like that's sort of all contained in Luthen, which I find such a fascinating character. Like, he knows on some level, like he's a response to the hero villain cliche of like, we're not so dissimilar, you and I.
Yeah,
Like that
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
a
yeah.
thing. He's fully aware that he is doing some things that are
Wrong.
wrong in a lot of
Yeah,
contexts, right?
yeah.
But he has made a decision that in order to be true to his values, he has to sacrifice himself. He has to become the kind of person who would do things that he finds abhorrent for the hope that what comes after him won't have to live like this. And that's why I find his speech in that episode so profound and just incredible. I mean, Stellan Skarsgård is just he's perfect in this role. Like he just
He's
is
the
so
tops. He's the tops. And it's what's amazing is that speech in so many ways is so cliche, and yet it was just so well done. Like, like, what have you
yeah.
done? What have you done for the revolution? It's like, what have you sacrificed? And it's like, I sacrificed everything. I
Yeah.
sacrificed anyway. Like, there's so many ways you could have approached that same monologue, and it on all sides, from the writing to the performance to the staging to just everything. It was just so pitch perfect.
Yeah. Because like I
Um
also think like you get that sense too, right? That like he also is like, here's my face, you're in now, like basically like you belong to me
right.
because you know who I, like because that's like the whole thing. Like they're gonna kill Andor because Andor's seen his face. Like it means like
Yeah.
yeah. Like and that's full of that's it's the evidence like what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm a bad guy, like I will do bad things now or whatever. Like I've sold my soul and just and that's kind of like proof to him, like, don't you are in this now too. And like, you don't have a choice because I have just proven, I've basically just shown to you that I will, you know, kill you or whatever.
No, yeah, and there's a similar scene. I mean, it's not a similar scene, but there's another instance of Luthen really being real about why he's doing what he's doing. The second scene with Saw, I think, in the penultimate episode, the one right before the finale, he had previously asked Saw to back up this other faction's attack, this other rebel leader named Krieger. And Saw initially says no, and then all of a sudden he changes his mind, and Luthen knows that the Empire has discovered Krieger's plan and is setting up an ambush. So while he has decided that he just has to sacrifice Krieger in order to maintain cover, because then they'll twig to the fact that they must have a mole in their ranks, he decides to tell Saw the truth. And there's a moment where Saw is understandably pissed off, and he has to wonder. He even says to him, like, would you have sacrificed me? And, Luthen is like, Saw, like, this is what we have to do. Like, you know this. You know this. And to Saw's credit, he does. He doesn't do the movie thing where then all of a sudden the alliance falls apart because he feels like he can't trust Luthen. And he says something like, for the greater good. And Luthen says, whatever you want to call it. And Saw's like, let's call it war. And not only is that a phenomenally, disgustingly good line, but that exchange contains the contradiction inherent in all of this. Like, let's call it war. You are killing, murdering, sacrificing in the name of goodness and peace. Like, that's an inherently perverse act. But in that exchange, that encapsulates the complexity and the messiness and the moral grayness of what you have to do in order to do the quote right thing for the quote greater good.
Yeah, and if JJ was filming that, it wouldn't have been on that conversation. It would have been on the war. It would have been when they got attacked and they got slaughtered. And I think that's like, that perspective, it kind of shows like what matters are these conversations. What matters is like these choices that are being made, and when people are choosing to be vulnerable in these moments where Luthen was like, he was clearly on his edge of like, I don't know if what I've done is the right thing. And now I'm kind of giving you the chance to tell me if I've gone too far.
Well, so that's really interesting because I think he does think it's the right thing, but I think what he's doing in that moment is like he's showing this is what it's like. These are the choices, and it sucks. I think it sucks too. I hate this, right? So what would you tell me? You tell me what the right thing is. And, Saw, like, he's not a stupid guy. Like, he goes along with it. He's like, you're right.
Yeah.
And I think it's very telling that really awesome dogfight where Luthen's ship is caught in the tractor beam from that Imperial ship, which is like such a tense sequence and is so satisfying. And like, Luthen, he blows his cover to escape. I don't think it's a coincidence that happens right after he had that conversation with Saw, because I think he's pissed off that that's what he has to do. And he just wants to fight these bastards. I think he's letting loose. I think he wants to blow up some fucking spaceships in that scene, because I think the idea that that's what the fight has to be, like, I have to make these decisions where I'm sacrificing 50 guys
Yeah.
so that we can win.
Can I also just say, like, why? I mean, it's like the Rogue Ones. Like, why do they look so good? Why does like that space stuff that show's doing, like the ships look so good compared to like a lot of CGI space stuff? And again, it's like that was, to me, that was probably one of my favorite parts of Rogue One, was like those ships felt physical. Like they just did the perfect job of space battles that I feel like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why
totally.
maybe some of the same creative people, but I was super impressed with like how that all looked.
Well, yeah. So one of the things I think, so I know that they did this on Rogue One, and I think you can see that it's not really there in the other movies. I really think it's the lighting. They let the highlights blow out. If you look at actual footage of like the International Space Station or the space shuttle or something, what's in sunlight is super overexposed, and what's not in light is very dark. And I think rather than exposing so that it's, exactly perfect, they try to recreate that limited range of exposure where, like, in order for you to see this ship, the brights are like really bright.
Right.
They're aiming for realism, and what I love about that is it's like they take that theme and they run it across every aspect of the show. Like the realism and the way that, I mean, maybe not a spaceship that has like lightsabers shooting out of the side of it, but like everything else feels like very, like how they handle that is very realistic. And as you were saying that, it's like I'm not so interested in like this Jedi, potential Jedi connection to Luthen, but I am fascinated as to why he has so much like he has some technology that it looks like that's not just a regular, like
Right.
not everybody's walking down the street with that. And I think I have a feeling that when we find out more about if we find out more about who he is, it's only going to be to hate him more. We are going to hate this guy. Like, he did not profiteer. I feel like he didn't profiteer off of off, or like get all this stuff in a way that it's just like, I just feel like they're going to make his character more gray. If
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he had something to do with like the mining that destroyed Cassian's planet or something along those lines. Like, I don't know, but it's like it could be something in the context of what they're setting up. Because I don't think we're going to find something that is brought outside from Star Wars lore. I think it's going to be something that they have already set up or incorporated into what they've constructed already. Like, that's just my feeling. So Cassian, I think that's possibly the first time we have mentioned his name, who's the titular character of the show, which I think is fascinating. And there was a question from, I think, an interview in, I think it was the Hollywood Reporter. I'll have to find it, but Sean T. Collins, the Sean T. Collins on Twitter, he asked Diego Luna this question. He says, one of the most unusual things about the show is that, especially in the early episodes, Cassian Andor is not particularly charismatic. We're used to dramas centered on the most magnetic guy in the room. And then Diego Luna says, you probably were in the room with him and never noticed. Cassian had to be that guy because this is a big show that wants to tell the story of people that big shows never cared about before. It's the only way to be honest about a revolution. Yes, there are leaders, but revolutions are not made by leaders. They're made by numbers, by conviction, by regular people thinking they can do something extraordinary. This is the story of one of those people that was never celebrated. Oh, this person is going to bring change. This person is different. No, not really. The strength of community, that's what the show is about. You cannot fall into the trap of making the charismatic, funny guy who you know from the beginning is going to find a way out. You have to think the opposite. You have to question, why are we supporting him? I was always saying, let's avoid movie moments as much as we can.
That's great.
I thought that was really fascinating because it speaks to what we were saying in that first episode and what we were saying earlier, that like this show is not about the people leading a revolution. It's not about top down revolution. It's about bottom up, and it's about community and solidarity and the choices that people make. And I was really affected by the Prison Break episode. Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis, in that speech he gives over the loudspeaker where he's telling all the prisoners to rise up and giving them instructions. Like at one point he says something along the lines of, you know, if you see someone who needs help or is confused, help them. Like the only way we get out of this is if we help each other and we go together, and that's how we beat them. They're not expecting us to do this, right? Like the solidarity that he was expressing in that moment, the idea that, you know, he would take the time to say, if you see someone who needs help or is confused, stop and help them, was just so moving to me. And then never mind the heartbreak that like it turns out he can't go because he can't swim.
Chef's kiss right there. It was beautiful.
And then Cassian can't help him because he's pushed by the tides of people, by the tides of
No
history.
time. He had no time.
He just was like, he stopped,
He
and he got pushed, you know, the you know, whatever you want to call it, like destiny just pushed him before he could go back and help him, unfortunately.
No,
Yeah.
totally. And actually, speaking to what Diego Luna just said in that interview I quoted, you know, once again, like there are people online who are like, oh, well, we never actually see what happens to Andy Serkis. If he could show up, it's like he'll probably show up later, like he could show up later, blah, blah, blah. And in my mind, I'm like, no, you're never going to know whether he made it out or whether he died. And Cassian is never going to know whether he made it out or whether he died, because that's the whole point of this show. It's about, as Diego Luna said, it's about all the people who were part of this revolution, who get overlooked, who are forgotten, who did heroic things, who you're never going to know about their sacrifice. You're never going to know their names. And I think I get the impulse, like when you see a character that you love so much and you really latch onto, you want to see more of them. But the brilliance of this show, and I think that Tony Gilroy and Beau Willimon and the other writers are smart enough to know the worst thing they could do is to give more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, I don't think we're ever going to find out what happened to the sister. Right. That's done.
No,
like, that's,
no.
Yeah.
And
that's the reality.
Yeah, no, it's right. Yeah,
that
exactly.
They're aiming for.
I know I'm terrified he's not going to meet up with his friends that he let go at the end. Like, is that the theme? Like, those people are like,
yeah. I think they're the next band. Right. I think we're going to time jump and we're going to, like, they will have done stuff together and they may not all be there anymore, but I feel like they took a very specific beat to like show this is the remnants of what happened here.
Yeah.
And kind of to the point of Diego Luna, how the whole thing, what I love about that that quote was in our first podcast, one of us had mentioned that that the town itself was being treated like a character to some extent, like
Mhm.
and I feel like you got to see that group growth, that group character growth in the first 3 episodes, in the next 3 episodes on the heist, on the next 3 episodes of the prison break, and then on the final 3 episodes we return back to the original town. And then also the cherry on top of that group, like the seeing those groups interact and developing the groups as a character, is we get to see the inside the Empire and see how they are working as a group and see how that is comparing to these other things. And I feel like
Yeah.
it's a
No.
real it's character study on top of like characters, how character dynamics study, and it's just great.
Yeah. No solidarity inside the Empire. It's all like bureaucratic infighting and
Dog eat dog.
backbiting, and yeah, it's some bullshit.
And that whatever different units, you know, saying, well, this is our purview and not our, you
Yeah.
know, yeah. I want to say like something I found really interesting. Speaking of kind of that now bringing the Empire supposed to come into the fair next now, and then kind of the prison too, is like I feel this is Star Wars at its most sci-fi in terms of like, especially if you kind of think about like maybe mid-century sci-fi, Vonnegut style, like the idea of the dying cries of an alien species as a torture device. Like to me, that's something like straight out of Vonnegut or something that Star Wars as science fantasy, right, more than sci-fi, never really actually did stuff like that. Or again, the design of the prison, you know, like that's
Yeah.
like to me,
No.
that's like kind of like real, not hard sci. I don't know what you kind of call that style of like, I don't know, you know, like Vonnegut, and you know, the guy who wrote like, you know, Blade Runner, you know, like that style sci-fi.
Yeah. Philip K. Dick. I
Yeah.
think it's more psychological.
Right.
Oh, which I think is more like literary.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a literary idea, right? That the torture alien cries are torture devices. A very literary thing to me. And they did a smart thing by you don't hear it. You don't know what it is. And that's
Exactly.
genius.
Because it's an idea, right? Which is sort of inherently more literary because it's something that you have to imagine,
Yeah.
you know, versus something cinematic. Yeah, but like it's like little things like that that the show excels at, that, you know, Star Wars is normally known for. But this show, ostensibly made by someone who has no investment in Star Wars or fantasy, like he does amazing. He beats Star Wars at its own game. Like he makes the Empire the most horrific, like that torture scene where you don't even hear what it is, but just the idea
Mhm.
of what it is, and the idea that that's what they would use this for, is like so evil. It's more evil than like any scene of Emperor Palpatine in like any movie. No amount of gleeful cackling and lightning from the fingers will ever approach the horror of that idea.
Yeah. That line, right? The children cries are especially, you know, like effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it is a very sci-fi idea. Like it's so mundane, but like that's a sci-fi idea, which is really interesting. I mean, again, like you were saying, Nikki, it seems like Tony Gilroy is really experimenting with genre. And I think I heard him on an interview say, like, you know, I had no experience with sci-fi or fantasy, but he was like, I found it was actually kind of fun and freeing. Like you can do things. Like he said, I learned what every sci-fi writer has known for 100 years. It's like you can do a lot with the freedom that it allows. And I think that he did it, you know, masterfully. Like something I was really struck by was just like the detail of Marva's droid after she passes away. And Brasso is like so tender with the droid, who in the Star Wars universe, it's like the treatment of droids is either like played for humor or it's shown to like say something about a character. We have seen characters in Star Wars treat droids like they're deserving of respect and like emotional consideration, but it's sort of superficial, right? It's like sort of the exception. Whereas in this show, when the droid B2, he doesn't want to leave Marva's house, and he asks him to stay with him for the night, and Brasso's like, one night.
Yeah.
It's just like that kind of emotional depth from a droid in Star Wars is not something I ever thought we would get from Star Wars. Like I don't know. I just never thought we'd get there.
It's heartbreaking how heartbroken the Beam Motu is. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
that poor little thing. I think maybe there's something maybe on purposely. I don't know. Like the retroactive story, again where like no droids in the bar and that was just a thing, and then you find and then people say, oh, because what caused the biggest space war that killed billions? It was a droid army, and that's why there is this
Yeah, I
hatred.
mean, that's a retcon thing.
Yeah, totally right. But then like
Yeah.
taking that retcon is now it's canon or whatever, and you take it into this fair next world. You're like, well, this is a world that needs this is a planet that's about blue collar solidarity, right? Like they don't have time to hate, the aliens, the humans, color, all of them, and droids are all they're a community together because they have to be because they're like they understand this concept of solidarity on this planet, which is why it becomes maybe this hotbed, right?
I think that that's exactly right. Just as we wrap up here, it came out that Marva's hologram speech at her
the F word, yes, fuck.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, she gives this amazing sort of speech rallying cry, and it ends with "Fight the Empire."
Yeah.
And apparently, as originally scripted, she was supposed to say "fuck the Empire." And Disney wouldn't let them get away with that, which I understand. But I think it's really interesting. Grace and I were talking about this the other day. I totally get the instinct, and I don't think it's even a wrong instinct, but I think "Fight the Empire" is better than "Fuck the Empire" in this context.
It's a litmus test, man. I think this is a litmus test. Like this is like how far are you in what direction? Like,
well, but there are two reasons. The practical one is that "Fight the Empire" is a call to action. Like she is trying to rally and instruct these people. And I think if she said "fuck the Empire," that's like more of an emotional kind of explosion and less like a harnessing of like, now let's go do this sort of thing. Like that's my take on it.
Compromise would be fuck the Empire up.
Okay.
Fuck them up.
Yeah. I do like, in weird little roles and weird little acting. Whoever the head of the Imperial, garrison there, who's the guy there who freaks out, that freak out that he tips over the droid. That again,
no,
like,
yeah, because he was like, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like this is gonna,
and it personally pissed him off. It makes you realize that he's not an opportunist. He's not. He's a believer, right? In it, and then you see that kind of again that evil or something, right? That he's like he can't even abide by this freedom of speech, right? He can't abide that. So yeah, I thought that was a weird little, just like the show is just so perfect by making every little character and person like have this like inner reality in that way.
Oh, I did have one quick question on your read on something on the final episode. I can't remember the name of the guy, but he exchanged hats with. I'm running blank with all the names.
Oh yeah, right. Cyril and like his old lieutenant or whatever. Like they're on.
So the old lieutenant. There's a moment where he's kind of looking at Cyril when the conversation's happening, and at the very last time you see him, he's like getting drunk on the steps or something like that, or he's just sitting. How did you read that? How did you guys read that?
I read that as, I don't think that character is like very self-reflective about his beliefs or why he's doing what he's doing. And I think that this was a clusterfuck, and I think he's getting drunk. I think he was like, well, that was a hell of a thing. Like these are the guys who you can recruit to buy into the cause, because I don't think that they're really thinking too much about it as long as their place is secure, versus Cyril, who's a true believer. I don't know. That's my instinct.
I think that's whole last part of that episode, that scene, like, to me, that was two of the most arresting shots were the radio guy who sells tickets dying and the way they lingered on him. And then, that really shot of that guy. And I think it's like, maybe it's just like, look at the collateral damage of this, like.
Yeah, I mean, really, at the end of the day, I think it's like that. I think it's look at the collateral damage. I don't know that there's anything specifically deep that we're meant to read into it per se, but I don't
I
know.
wasn't thinking deep, but I do feel like this the moment where he's looking during Martha's scene, and the fact that the Empire didn't just hang out there, like nobody else who was on the other side of that conflict just hung around there. Like they got out of that space. Like
Yeah.
if that place wasn't home, you got out of there. And I thought there was something kind of interesting that guy kind of was like, that is where he decided to collect himself. I think there was something about that. I don't know. There's something about that. I would not be surprised if we found out in the next season that he was actually part of the movement, that it actually did, Martha's speech actually did make one converter, and that one converter, it's about numbers. It's
Oh, that's
about that
interesting.
thing that like she actually touched somebody, and it wasn't just speaking to her crowd, but she actually reached someone. And
Right.
and that's what
That's
that kind
interesting.
of read to me.
Yeah. And because you can kind of see like where he sat before, he wasn't a stormtrooper. He wasn't even an Imperial. He was in security. And now he's seen twice what happens when you try to grasp too tight on a people and what happens. And maybe he's realized he's like this, yeah, like this idea of security, this idea of ultimate fascist security, it's just like it's not realistic, and this is what it causes. And maybe he's having a reckoning. That's what's happened, right? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really interesting read.
I want to rewatch that and
Uh,
maybe see some of his react like because he's with Sarah, but then he's not with Sarah, right? Like they split. Like something happens in that scene where he's like, my guy is now not my, like he's gone and rescued the evil woman, and this guy's hanging back. So yeah, something happened there, maybe.
So it feels like something just really subtle,
Yeah.
but also nicely profound if they do follow through with that
Mhm.
character in some way.
no, that's entirely possible. I would be very curious if that's a thread that they pick up, and I wouldn't put it past Tony Gilroy and the creators of this show, because I think he said he's completely invested in the inner lives and the reality of every one of these characters. Like that's the only way he knows how to write. So I think that you may very well be onto something. Any closing thoughts on season 1 of Andor?
Just I'm incredibly excited to see the second season, and I know 24 episodes feels like it's not. If they're doing 12 again, I would assume just the
Yeah,
story
they are.
structure, but like I mean, I would prefer only 24 episodes of this than 97 112 episodes of all the other stuff out there. Like
Mm,
this is I think it's important to have something to say, and Tony Gilroy has something to say, and he's using this medium and this franchise and this moment in time to say it, and he's taking his time to say it well, and I really do appreciate that. I really do.
well said, Mickey. Closing thoughts on Andor.
Yeah, I want to say definitely like, yeah, as we reach the end, the things I said in the beginning, I think really proved true. I think they really stuck to this line of like, this is almost, they're using the empire to say what happens if the Nazis won, sort of. Again, I think they dive deeper and deeper into the ideas of the Lieberstein, I believe it was called, like terraforming the world. Like, yeah, I love those two aliens and who their fish are now dead, who actually helped them out. That was such a beautiful and great character design and everything. That felt like I said, I think we talked about this back in the Boba Fett, like, oh man, that was real like Muppet 80s Muppet, doing like Lucasfilm
Mm.
stuff, type of thing. So I really enjoy that they're following that thread. The character and like yeah, like you said, the inner light of the character stuff is making this. And I would say like, yeah, like 24, great. I think I saw he said they originally were thinking 5 seasons, and now I am pissed we're not getting that because it would have been like the same time frame, right? They only have 2 years or whatever it is until that first one, so they would have gotten deeper into some of the things, you know. And so I think we're gonna it's gonna be remiss that maybe there's like deeper stuff we don't get, but they're still within what they're doing. They're doing it perfectly, like it might be better because it's more focused and everything. Um, so, but it you know, you know, we are just talking about Star Wars in relation to Star Wars. We haven't gotten to the idea of like this might be the best show on TV right now. I definitely think it might be, yeah, and it's just great.
No, I think it very well could be. Shout out to Maya Chupkov, who does the podcast Proud Stutter, who was a guest on this show, who's not a Star Wars fan. And in that interview I did with her, she said she was curious to check it out, and I suggested she start with Andor. And coincidentally, I saw she tweeted a couple of days ago her top 10 TV shows of 2022, and number one was Andor. So I think it worked, and I think that speaks to what you just said, Mickey. I think
Plus or minus the Nathan for you, which is a whole different thing. I think this might be
the rehearsal, or do you
the
mean Nathan
rehearsal.
for
That's what I
you?
meant. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'm halfway through that season, so no spoilers, please. It's an intense show, but yeah, I haven't been as excited and as invested and as energized in a Star Wars story in a long time, and this is just, I mean, what a surprise and what a gift. I'm so thrilled and happy and kind of bewildered that the show exists, and I'm really looking forward to season 2. I'm also glad that they're just now shooting it, so we probably won't get it until 2024 at the earliest, because like this was an intense watch. Like I it's like I can use the come down a little bit, and sure, I'll watch Mando and see and have that and see what that's about. But anyway, thanks guys for participating in the final episode of Trash Compactor for 2022. This has been a hell of a year, and thank you to everybody who's been on the show and who's listened to the show. And we will be back in 2023 with season 2. And yeah, one way out, guys. One way out.
One way out.
Way out.
How do I stop this thing?